And sent from her last trip with the president to her last mission to the Middle East, some shuttle diplomacy from Hillary Clinton this week. We're going to talk about that now on the roundtable, joined again by Matthew Dowd, Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post, David Sanger, New York Times, also the author of Confront and Conceal Obama's Secret Wars and Surprising Use of American Power, Joe Klein of Time Magazine, Peggy Noonan of the Wall Street Journal. And David, let me begin with you, because we did see this shuttle diplomacy from Hillary Clinton this week, the skirmish between Israel and Hamas over Gaza. And you wrote about it in the New York Times this week, saying it was in many ways a warm-up for a possible conflict between Israel and Iran.
That's right. What you saw happen as the Hamas missile attacks began on Israel and the counterattacks began was the Israelis trying to figure out what capability Iran had, because it was Iranian missiles that had been slipped into the Gaza, and those were the ones that were reaching toward Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Now, they weren't enormously successful in that they didn't do very much damage.
And the Israeli missile defenses worked quite well.
And that was the main reason. Iron Dome, a program that the Israelis designed and the Americans funded, turned out to be pretty effective, not only at shooting down missiles, but at determining which of the missiles it shouldn't even bother to shoot at, because they were headed to the sea or to some place where there was no population. That was a message to the Iranians, that if they thought that they would manage to get these missiles into the Gaza or into Lebanon in a sort of stealth Cuban Missile Crisis kind of scene where you slip in the missiles, that in fact they would be significantly less effective. On the other hand, the Iranians also learned a few lessons from this. They learned what the Israeli capability was. Now, the big question going forward is, could this help diffuse the possibility of a confrontation with Iran in 2013? The U.S. has now said, along with its allies, it wants to start the negotiations up again.
That is coming up. But Joe Klein, in the meantime, every side seemed to claim a victory from this ceasefire. But one clear development is that Hamas seems to have eclipsed the Palestinian Authority. They represent the Palestinians now.
Well, no, they represent the Palestinians in Gaza. I've sat down with the leadership of Hamas in the West Bank, and they've got elections coming this spring. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Hamas does on the West Bank. The West Bank, for the first time, I've been doing Israel for about 30 years now, and it's the first time that you've had a really effective, responsible Palestinian government on the West Bank. GDP has been growing by about 8%. Fatah has done very well on the ground, improving the lives of individual Palestinians.
But have they captured the hearts of the Palestinians?
I think that if you capture their wallets, their hearts and minds will follow. But I do believe that, you know, everybody's claiming victory. I think it was a defeat for everybody. And it's going to be a continuing struggle between Hamas and Israel and Gaza. I think that, by the way, I think that Egypt's role in this, President Morsi's role, was really a wonderful sign for the future. It tells us that the Muslim Brotherhood, who control Egypt and are going to be a major force throughout the region, are going to be moderates and going to try and
with a cost.
Yeah, it came at a price.
That's a real concern. To follow up on something Joe said is that obviously everybody's happy that there was a ceasefire and the conflict has dissipated a bit. But I think actually the wrong lessons are going to be learned by both sides. I think what's going to end up in this process is the polarized sides of each, of the Israelis who now want a military conflict and the Palestinians who want to confront Israel are going to be emboldened by this for different reasons. And that, I think, actually creates more of a state of fear. I think the big problem in it is their fear exists on both sides, and I wrote about this week, as well as the fiscal clip, is I don't think either side can see a future where conflict doesn't exist, because the conflict has now given their lives meaning, and if they take away the conflict, they no longer, the Israelis don't have a meaning, and the Palestinians don't have a meaning.
War is a force that gives us meaning. I mean, I feel some people actually started to see what was going on in the past week in the Middle East and started to actually turn away thinking, nothing here will ever change. This will never go away. So I sense among regular folks a certain, even as interesting diplomatic things are going on, I sense a certain despair or ennui or sense of this will never end, and that's not acceptable.
And this was a process, Ruth Marcus, that both the President and Secretary Clinton had stayed away from right up into these final moments, but she was able to come in at the last minute and broker a ceasefire with the help of the Egyptian president.
Broker a ceasefire, nice way to be closing out her tenure as Secretary of State. but it is only a ceasefire. It is not a solution. Gaza is going to be a chronic problem. And I think Joe's exactly right. The most interesting aspect of this episode was President Morsi, who played a positive role, which wasn't clear that he was going to play with respect to the ceasefire, and then turned around and exacted the price of seizing power. And note the State Department response, it's concerned.
The price, no judicial review of his decisions.
That's right. And this puts President Obama right back in the situation that many of his predecessors found themselves in. He is, at this point, tied to President Morsi, because if you can get a Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt to intervene in a case like this and bring about a ceasefire, it's enormously valuable. But if it does require him to do what the United States did for 30 years with President Mubarak, which is to just look the other way about what he's doing at home, that's going to be the dilemma that every previous American president's been in.
The interesting thing here is that Hamas is facing the same sort of political situation in Gaza as Morsi is facing in Egypt. Morsi is looking at the Salafists, the extremists. Those are the people who were in the streets the night that video, rioting over that video in Cairo. And in Gaza, there are extreme elements who have been the ones who've been sending the rockets across. And there was, I was not optimistic, you can't be optimistic, but there were negotiations going on between Hamas and Israel through kind of third parties, and then Israel killed the guy who was doing the negotiating for Hamas, Jabari. Hamas has to decide whether it wants to be with the extremists or whether it wants to be with the other Muslim Brotherhood organizations in the region as a kind of moderate conservative force.
I want to turn back to the debate.